All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome into our Zoom of the month. My name is Amy Davis. I am the registered dietitian and nutritionist over at Swerve. And today we are here with Judith Finlayson. She is the author of this amazing book, fascinating book called You Are What Your Grandparents Ate. So Judith, welcome. And we're so excited to have you here tonight.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I'm really looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
And we were talking earlier about how much we love your background and all the books, and you're just like, it is the coolest thing ever. So love your office.
A writer's study, a writer's room. People think
Yeah.
a writer has an exciting life. This is it.
Well, it is amazing for sure. So yeah, we'll give everybody a couple more minutes to join in the Zoom. But as I said, my name is Amy Davis. I am the registered dietitian over at Swerve. And tonight we're going to be kind of covering a lot of really cool topics that you introduced in this book. But before we get started, before we get too deep into it, I'll just go over a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. It looks like most people have their cameras off. So, you probably want to have it in speaker view. So if you want to look at the Zoom on speaker view, you're just going to click that that link in the top right that says view, and you can, just have it on speaker view if you just want to see who's talking instead of everybody in the Zoom. And then also we're going to be using the chat box tonight for questions. So if you just, kind of look in the middle, bottom of the window here, there's a little chat box. You can type any of your questions in this chat box. And look, we already have a question from Elizabeth. Is this going to be recorded? Yes, this will be recorded. So if you have to drop off, go to dinner, whatever, that's totally fine. We're going to email the link out to y'all after the Zoom, and you will be able to view it afterwards. So no worries there. But in the meantime, we would love to hear where everybody is tuning in from. So if you just want to chat your name and where you're tuning in from, I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana. Judith, where are you from?
I'm from Toronto, Canada. So
Toronto, Canada. Okay, so
international get together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm jealous of your weather right now. It's getting increasingly hot in New Orleans, and we're about to get in the thick of summer. So I'm sure it's much more pleasant up there right now.
Well, it's perfect here right now. It's 80 degrees and sunny, and that's what I like.
Yeah, that's pretty much perfect to me as well. So cool. So love seeing where everyone's from. It looks like we have a big mix. Texas, Birmingham. Oh, a lot of Texas, actually. A lot of New Orleanians as well. We have someone from upstate New York. Lily, hello. Mary from Pittsburgh. We have Vanessa from Fresno, California. So pretty much coast to coast. Very exciting. Okay, y'all. Well, I am going to go ahead and, just kind of get started by telling y'all a little bit more about Swerve. If you aren't familiar, Swerve is a natural sugar replacement. This is the original product here. We have a granular, powdered, and granular confectioners and brown Swerve. So 3 different sweetener varieties, and these are all going to be 0 calories, don't affect your blood sugar at all. Really great way for your patients and clients to kind of reduce or eliminate sugar in their diets without making any sacrifices when it comes to health or taste. So we have a whole line of 0 calorie sweeteners, and then we also have a line of gluten and grain-free bake mixes. So these are going to be made with almond flour, coconut flour, so real low glycemic, real high quality ingredients that you usually don't find in bake mixes. And, Judith and I will be talking about diet quality tonight and how that can affect literally generations. We're going to talk about sugar and its role in health over generations. So, this is where Swerve can really come into play in things like that is, not eating too much sugar, not never eating sugar. Everybody likes their birthday cake every now and then, but it can be a really great solution to people who have a bit of a sweet tooth. So yes, that is the information on Swerve. And, we'll be sharing lots more resources and stuff throughout the night, but swervesweet.com is our website if you want to learn more. And then, Emily, if you want to drop the link in, guys, we're also going to be giving each of you a copy of the book tonight for attending, which is really cool. So you're going to actually receive this book. Just make sure to sign up in the link that we're about to drop in the chat now. And then you're also going to get one continuing education credit. So 1 hour of continuing education for coming to this Zoom tonight. So we're super excited about this. This is the first time that we've done continuing education, and we definitely want to keep it coming. So make sure to click that link, grab the book, get your continuing education, and sign up for our newsletter so you can kind of keep in touch and see what we've got coming up for the rest of the year. So, all right, Judith, I think that's all of our housekeeping, right? Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to introduce you, and then we're going to get into the nitty gritty. Okay. So guys, I'm going to read Judith's bio real quick. She is a best-selling author who has written books on a variety of subjects, from personal well-being to women's history to food and nutrition. A former national newspaper columnist for the Globe and Mail, magazine journalist, and board member of various organizations focusing on legal, medical, and women's issues. She is also the author of over a dozen cookbooks, and she is in Toronto, Canada, just like you said earlier. So Judith, thank you so much for being here. You obviously have so much knowledge, and you're just a wealth of information in this space and so many other different spaces. So we're just really excited to learn from you tonight and kind of talk about some of the main topics of your book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I feel like the first question I wanted to ask you is, why did you decide to write this book in the first place?
Well, somebody gave me a copy of a book many years ago called Nutrition in the Womb, which was written by the British epidemiologist David Barker. And I was really interested in what David Barker concluded. He was looking at health conditions throughout England. He was working on something called the Atlas of Mortality. And he began to see links between maternal mortality rates and then incidences of stroke or heart disease 70 years later. And this led him to suspect that the cause was something that was going on in the womb, something that was happening during pregnancy. But he didn't have any way of documenting that scientifically. He set about looking for birth cohort information, which was really almost non-existent at that point. Stumbled on a cache of stuff that was documented in the early 1900s in England by, that's another whole story of how he got that information. Then found a couple of other big cohorts of birth information. The Dutch hunger winter, which some people may have heard about, when women were starved during the Second World War in Holland. And then information from Finland. Based on that data, he was able to come up with something called the Barker hypothesis, which was published in the Lancet in 1986, and which linked poor nutrition in the womb with chronic illness later in life. I'm overgeneralizing a bit, but that's the basic direction of it. It was really kind of a groundbreaking idea. And when I started talking to people about this, it led to the origins of this whole science that we're going to talk about tonight, called the developmental origins of health and disease.
Mhm.
And when I started asking people in the medical profession that I would run into or that I knew, nobody had ever heard of David Barker or had ever heard of his research.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, that's really incredible, because this is extraordinary information.
Right.
So that's why I decided to write the book.
That's awesome. Well, I feel like that segues really great into our first question, because you're talking about the developmental origins of health and disease here. But can you explain to us, one of the topics you write about a lot of in the book is called the 100-year effect. So what does that actually mean? And how would you define that?
Well, what we know, thanks to the science of the developmental origins of health and disease, we really do understand that what you eat today will influence the health of your unborn children and your grandchildren. And that's basically because reproductive cells, that is your mother's egg and your father's sperm, carry biological memories of past experiences. These include the experience of their parents and grandparents, and these experiences are known as epigenetic modifications. So it's easy to talk about. I mean, if you're looking at how the health of, how parents influence the health of their offspring, even before conception, it's easy to grasp the image of a woman, because her eggs, if you're a female, your eggs are formed while you're still in your mother's womb. We forget that. But once you have that image, you can see very clearly, or it's very easy to conceptualize, that the air that your mother breathed, the food that she ate, the toxins she was exposed to are going to affect the quality of those eggs. And it's more difficult to visualize the male role, which is transmitted through sperm. The science here is really in the early stages, but we do know that boys' sperm cells also carry biological memories of past experiences. Sperm cells are formed during puberty, so boys' experiences at that time have the biggest impact on their reproductive cells. So with the girls, it's while they are in the womb as female babies forming. With males, it's around the time of puberty when their sperm cells are forming. And those experiences leave these epigenetic memories, marks, whatever you want to call them, which are passed on through the generations. And, you know, if you get into what's actually happening with females, the effects of poor nutrition show up in two basic ways when they're pregnant. If the baby isn't getting enough nutrients, it really affects organ formation. So the fetus, in a way, controls some of its own development by deciding that it will trade off cells that it doesn't need. In order to protect, there's a kind of hierarchy of organ formation. It wants to protect things like the brain and the heart. In doing that, it will trade off lower, less significant functions, like say the kidneys. So it doesn't form as many nephrons as it would if it had an optimum development, in order to protect things like the heart and the brain. These are good choices developmentally. But what it does is increase the vulnerability to chronic illness later in life. another process that's going on at the same time, which is more complex and difficult to really predict, is called epigenetic modification.
Mhm.
And as that fetus is forming, its various cells are developing, and it's developing this is happening through epigenetic changes. But that's why you take these two reproductive cells, the sperm and the female egg, and they become brains and hearts, and and that process is through epigenetics. But the external environment influences how those genes express themselves. So what you have to understand, and epigenetics was the big move forward. When Dr. Barker started doing his original work, it was very focused on organ formation and the fact of poor nutrition and how that influenced how organs were formed, and this process of trading off in the hierarchy. Epigenetics really started to come onto the scene in the 1990s, and we could then see it's because the fetus is very plastic, and because it's so plastic, these impacts have a very significant impact during development. And so although your genes are fixed, how they express themselves is influenced by environmental impacts like poor nutrition and stress, exposure to toxins.
Right.
And these impacts register on cells by a process known as epigenetic modification. And that is, if a cell is deprived of nutrients while developing, the genes may react by adjusting how they express themselves. Normally, they're small adjustments, but they can build up over time. And they registers on cells. I like to use the term biological memory, like a biological memory. And these can be passed on to several generations thanks to a process known as transgenerational inheritance. Poor fetal nutrition is linked with epigenetic changes associated mostly with metabolic disorders later in life. And a malnourished fetus, which is probable if their mother's diet is chock full of nutrient deficient processed food, is more likely to experience malfunctions in body systems related to metabolism. So the 100-year effect really comes about by starting with the mother's eggs and the father's sperm.
Mhm.
What we're seeing, and that's passed on through the generations, what we're seeing is that this 100-year effect is showing up over the course of our love affair in America with processed foods.
Right. So that's so interesting. I think we all know, especially as dietitians, like I'm going back to my lifestyle or nutrition through the life cycle courses and learning about, nutrition during pregnancy and increased needs and what is potentially at risk when malnutrition is at play. But I don't think that I knew that, a male's nutrition through puberty is extremely important because they're basically, putting contributing to the health of their sperm in puberty. And I feel like that's almost a really important note for us as dietitians, because I feel like a lot of teenage boys aren't really eating that great, so it's really a very important factor, especially if you're working with teens and families and things of that nature, to make sure that nutrition is great in that time. So Yeah, that's extremely interesting.
It,
And
it, the paternal origins of health and disease, this is a new area, subcategory of the developmental origins, which really, the developmental origins really looked at mothers and the effect of poor nutrition specifically in the womb on the fetus, and how that is transmitted through the mother and then through the generations, through these epigenetic modifications, which are passed on. But with the boys, one of the early studies, about the same time that Dr. Barker was publishing the Barker hypothesis, was done by a Swedish epidemiologist who went back and looked at his little town over Killex and found it was a farming community in northern Sweden. And he found that in years of great produce, if boys ate too much, their grandsons, he could show the links that their grandsons would die much younger. And he went on to team up with a geneticist, and they began to do things like the effects of, say, smoking on young boys around the time of puberty. And they found that the sons of those boys were much more likely, for instance, to be obese. So we really have focused on mothers, and mothers are very important. They do have the starring role once conception takes place. So you have these what the baby will draw on the nutrients that the mother provides to it while it is pregnant, but it also draws on the nutrition in her body. So this is part of the 100-year effect. If she is part of a generation that is in succession of having poor nutrition, then she is not likely to have the nutritional reserves in her own body to properly nurture that fetus. So it's more than what you eat, it's also how strong or how deep your nutritional reserves are. So there are those two things going on. We should probably talk a little bit about processed foods.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like you have these environmental factors, you have certain genetics that play a role in your health, but then you also have, what you eat and your nutrition and different lifestyle behaviors as well. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about processed foods? This whole thing kind of started in the 50s, and now we have 3 generations now that we kind of can look back on and say, what has been the effect of these more like processed foods that are high in fat and salt and sugars? Would love to hear more about that.
Well, I think what epidemiologists are now beginning to see is really the tip of the iceberg. And when we talked about that 100-year effect, that's kind of what we're beginning to see. American fast food culture was really spawned in the 1950s, and it has set the dietary standard now for 3 generations of Americans. It's built around high-calorie, nutrient-poor, overly processed foods. So what we are seeing is that a significant proportion of the US population is at risk for nutritional deficiencies because there just aren't enough nutrients in processed foods. And where people are describing are saying that many Americans are suffering from what can be best described as high-calorie malnutrition. And a diet high in processed foods also promotes inflammation. And inflammation can too be passed on through the generations. We're now seeing that if a mother suffers from inflammation, it increases the possibility that her offspring will as well and will develop chronic disease. So if we're talking about that 100-year effect, you know, what you're seeing is, say, the grandmother who was introduced to processed foods, too many processed foods in the 1950s, the mother who ate many more, say in the, you know, 80s or 90s, and the kids who are coming along now, who really are hooked on it. You have 3 generations of diets comprised of these nutrient deficient foods, and we're beginning to see epidemiologists are now looking at the fact that we have increased rates of anxiety, depression, inflammation, and metabolic syndrome. And the real clincher on that is that they're now saying that the young generation of Americans can expect not to live as long as their parents did. And that's, you know, a really alarming trend.
Right. Yeah, that's super scary. And we do have a few comments in the chat here. Susan, looks like Susan's really well informed on this content, and she said the Dutch hunger winter is a fascinating study.
Fascinating.
There are 3 cohorts that are still studied. One that was exposed to undernutrition during the first trimester, second, those exposed in the second trimester, and third at the end of pregnancy. Nutrition effect is different depending on timing. Also, study of these cohorts started, and the investigation of NTD and folate and the association of celiac disease and gluten. So really interesting study there. We'll have to get some more information on the Dutch hunger study there. And then Janine had a question specifically on, are the results the same for everyone, or are there differences based on ethnicity?
That's not as simple a question to ask. We are seeing differences. Some of these changes, I don't want to say they're linked with genes, but your genes do influence some of the responses. Your genes, certain SNPs will predispose you to certain links. We are seeing there are active developmental, DOHAD is the acronym for Developmental Origins of Health and Disease, very active groups in India. And that's where they have really been looking at the effects of intergenerational poor nutrition, which was not showing up in obesity. They have this phrase that they use, the thin fat Indian. So it's really that these people are thin, but they have a lot of weight around the middle, the adipose weight, which, as nutritionists know, is the most dangerous, and that's full of all kinds of things that create metabolic problems. Mm-hmm. So it's not a simple, yes, there are differences with ethnicity. What you see are groups of people who have higher rates of chronic disease, because of long periods of malnutrition and poverty and stress. That's one of the things that they're looking at in India. You see some of it in China, and you see it in the US in some of the research around the stroke belt, which is in the southeastern United States, and which epidemiologists link to um, decades of social disruption and poverty. And that shows up, it does show up more in African American people who have an increased risk of stroke, but it's not necessarily because of their ethnicity. It's because of these social conditions that created it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's fascinating because it's not only, what someone ate, but it's also like it seems like any sort of metabolic like stress that they put on their body, whether it's starvation or, as we've seen the past few years, people eating this calorie dense but low nutrient fast foods all the time. So it's not just like what they did or didn't eat. It's almost like these like other environmental triggers and social situations as well.
Yes, absolutely. Nutrition is huge, but so is chronic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And the social determinants of disease. It's interesting because Dr. Barker linked back in the 1970s poor nutrition, poverty. He was seeing links between poverty. The highest rates of poverty were where he was also seeing the highest rates of heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
We now wouldn't be surprised by that because we're very well versed in the social determinants of health. Right. But in those days, that was really a kind of wacky observation. People had trouble getting their heads around it because heart disease was thought to be a disease of affluence from eating too much red meat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how our thinking on all of this has moved along and evolved over the years as we learn more and more.
Sure. Yeah, as we get more information, absolutely. So, kind of talking about what are some specific key factors in our ancestors' diets that affect our health generations later? Like, do we know certain nutrients or lack of certain nutrients can relate to better or worse outcomes, I guess?
Well, it's basically a quality of diet. I mean, one of the things I like to say at the end of a session on epigenetics and the developmental origins of health and disease is that there's a lot now of really cutting edge science in this, particularly in the epigenetics information. But what to do about it? I mean, that whole thing, we've been talking about basically bad news, the negative effects of all of this. Mm-hmm. But there is a good news scenario, and that is that you can really affect change and improve, even if you've been programmed for bad health because of some, poor nutrition in the womb or whatever. By changing your diet and by improving your lifestyle, you can also improve the expression of all of those genes that might have predisposed you to chronic illness. So, it is basically a healthy diet with an emphasis on plant foods. And a wide range of macronutrients. The microbiome is a huge area now, and that's really just moved into our consciousness within the last, no more than 15 years for sure. And that is really what we're seeing there is eat a lot of fiber, a lot of plant foods because polyphenols really help. Healthy fats like omega-3s don't necessarily nurture the bacteria, but they're more like a fertilizer. They create a very boosting environment in the microbiome that helps the beneficial bacteria to flourish. So it's you know, it's not rocket science. It's all of the things that we've been seeing in associative studies
Right.
over the past, say, 30 years. We're now seeing in hard science how we can make those how those improvements actually work, why eating things like broccoli are good for you, you know, the turmeric, you know, and the NRF2 pathway and all of that. You know, it's very complicated science, but it's common sense and
Right.
good old-fashioned healthy nutrition that still
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to know, that you can eat well and that's going to benefit your own life and your own health and wellness and stuff, but also generations to come. It's like a new sense of empowerment that like I'm eating this way not only for myself, but my kids and my grandkids and their aunts and their, descendants. So it's kind of a cool concept to think about, and almost like another thing that we can apply in nutrition as dietitians do in nutrition counseling. Like it's not just about you, it's about your family as well. So I think it's just really great information to have, and probably something that people don't think about too much. So very cool for sure. And then I do see someone has their hand raised, but guys, remember, you can, if you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat, just so that we don't miss anything, just so that we can see everything super clearly. And we are going to try to do a Q&A at the end as well. Just depends on how we are on time. So, but yes, if you have any questions about anything that Judith is talking about right now, go ahead and put those in the chat. But for right now, I guess let's talk about sugar a little bit more specifically, because, we kind of mentioned at the beginning, Swerve is a great product for people that are trying to eat less sugar or replace sugar, bake in a healthier way. And we all know that sugar has really large implications on health. Just in our own lifetimes, but what have you found in your research about the long-term or intergenerational effects of sugar?
Well, refined sugar is not good for you. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to give us an argument about that.
Right.
And we're eating more and more of it as a society. It's really alarming the amount of sugar that we consume. Cheerios is an example that I looked into for the book. It was introduced in 1941, and when researchers looked at a spin-off product, Honey Nut Cheerios, which was launched in 1979, the revamped version contained about 9 times as much sugar as the original. I mean, that's
significant.
It's significant. So sugar consumption has exploded even since I was a kid. And that's thanks to the amount of added sugar in soda. Adolescents, and not even adolescents, the amount of soda that people drink is really alarming. And it's also in processed foods. I mean, they add it routinely to things like pasta sauce and yogurt and and whatever. So study after study links the overconsumption of refined sugar with numerous health problems, obesity being the most obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
So they really use sugar, and I mean, as it's one of the triads, along with fat, to make you want more and more of the processed foods. It makes you want to eat more. And I talked a little bit about the microbiome. The microbiome is really, I think, kind of the new frontier in health. It's being linked with all kinds of diseases and also with all kinds of health benefits.
Mm-hmm.
But refined sugar also affects your microbiome. It encourages, too much of it encourages the growth of harmful gut bacteria, and that undermines microbial diversity, which is really key to having a healthy gut. And, you know, numerous diseases are linked with an unhealthy gut. You know, and that's from skin conditions like acne to obesity and now even autism. So we really need to try and limit our consumption of sugar by limiting our consumption of processed foods is one way of really doing that. Because you're getting the unhealthy fats and you're getting, you know, the refined grains as well, all of which are linked with negative health outcomes. So
yeah. Well, this is a great segue into Janine's question here. So she's asking, is there almost like a ranking of food violations, I guess you could call, like, is sugar the absolute worst? And then, or is it gluten, or is the bigger issue that we're not eating enough nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables, or is it maybe just a little bit of everything? I guess, like, if there's one thing that you should focus on for the health, the intergenerational health of your family, what should that be?
Eat a healthy diet. The nutritious diet is the most important thing. Eliminate processed foods. Any studies that they've done on the consumption of processed foods have shown that they're very bad for you. And they also, Tim Spector, who's a scientist in England, who does a lot of really interesting genetic research and microbiome research and diet research, his son wanted to go on a processed food diet, and he was on it he thought it was great. You know, he could eat junk food every day. And within about 5 days, and his father was, meanwhile, his father said, okay, you know, whatever, but he was testing his stool all the time. And it was amazing how quickly the diversity of the bacteria in his gut went south.
Wow.
And after about, I can't remember, 5 or 6 days, the kid was not so excited about eating his processed food diet, because he said, I'm just not feeling great. I feel terrible, you know. So really the priority is a nutritious diet with as many plant foods as you can, you know, heavily emphasizing plant foods, because plant foods do all kinds of good things, and the polyphenols and the fiber in plant foods are also the best strategy for building up your microbiome and for having a healthy gut. And then once you have a healthy gut, you know, you have a better chance of being in general health, good health, period.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I always think whenever you focus on including more of the good, it kind of automatically it pushes out a lot of the bad, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, too much sugar, too much soda, processed foods, all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's a great point there for sure. Okay, so let's see. Now I feel like we talked about kind of sugar in the microbiome, and you know, one of the things, and, you know, I know we've talked about Swerve a few times, and, you know, as a company, we're not anti-sugar. We're never going to tell people, like, don't eat the birthday cake. Like, you know, you're never going to have a piece of wedding cake again in your life. But it's just, I think we always try to lead with education and, you know, inform people about the issues with having too much sugar. You know, it's not like we want to suck all the joy out of your life, but if you can use something like Swerve to kind of round out your diet and still enjoy your sweets, but not get all those negative health effects of excess sugar consumption, I think that's really where you know, Swerve can really help out a lot of people. Janine, so great question. What's the composition of Swerve? So the main ingredient in Swerve is erythritol, and erythritol is actually a sugar alcohol that is made by fermenting the glucose from corn. So it's naturally made by fermentation. It's not an artificial sweetener or anything like that. And it actually just passes right through you, passes right through the digestive system and is excreted in the urine. Studies have shown it does not affect your microbiome at all. Because it has a fairly quick transit time in the body, and just, you just kind of pee it out pretty quickly. It doesn't cause any sort of, it's not fermented in the colon. It doesn't cause the gas, the bloating that some other sugar alcohols have been known to cause, because it's just a smaller molecular size. And so it passes through you pretty quickly. Whereas like some other ones, the xylitols, maltitols, those can cause a little bit more of those like tummy issues, gas and bloating, things like that. So erythritol is going to be the main ingredient. And then we also have some prebiotic fibers in the blend called oligosaccharides. This was one of the first questions Judith asked us when we met. She was like, "Oh, you've got fiber in Swerve." And it's true. We have a little bit of fiber. It's not a significant amount. It's really kind of there for baking and cooking functionality, so that baked goods brown and caramelize just like sugar would. And it just helps with overall sweetness and experience, and really just kind of helps Swerve be a really great substitute for sugar in baking. So it measures just like sugar, tastes like sugar in baking. If a recipe calls for 1 cup of sugar, you would just use 1 cup of Swerve. So it's a really great way to save a lot of calories and carbs and sugar in your baked goods and still have that same experience. It's a great question. And yes, we got those fibers for you, Judith. And yeah, so I know we had talked a little bit about some desserts that you would want to try. I think you have a special recipe for like pecan cranberry oatmeal cookies, right, Judith?
Yes. Oh, they're my favorite. They're so good.
And you could I really think brown Swerve would be spectacular in those.
Yes.
Definitely. You get that like oatmeal molassesy flavor. That'd be amazing. And then you had a chocolate pot de creme recipe as well with a little bit of chili, a little kick.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little bit of chili to pick up the chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a great dessert person. I would probably be more of a dessert person, but my husband is not a dessert person at all. So, we've been together now for almost 40 years. And so that's really leaned me in that direction. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that did impress me about your product are the flours, the almond flour and the coconut flour in your waffle and your cake mixes, because those are nutritious flours. And so often when people start trying to get rid of sugar, they end up using those awful refined flours, and it negates the value of it. So
yeah, I love that you pointed that out, because gosh, I love our baked mixes so much. Like, they're just amazing. They taste good and they're so nutritious. But yeah, those almond and coconut flours, they have a lot of fiber. They have a lot of healthy fats. I'll just eat a scone for breakfast some days and I'll feel great, because we're using those really great high quality ingredients. I'm not getting the sugar crash that you do from like a regular scone from, wherever. So yeah, the bake mixes are great too. And if you guys haven't seen those or heard of those before, we're always happy to send samples, or we'll point you in the right direction, but those are really great products as well. And yeah, Swerve has always been about just blood sugar control and helping educate people on keeping your blood sugar balanced, keeping your blood sugar levels balanced, and doing that by avoiding too much sugar and including a source of fat and protein at each meal, so that you're not on this like roller coaster all day long, and then you're getting all that good nutrition. So well, that's great. So I see we have about 10 minutes left. So guys, if you have any burning questions, go ahead and put those in the chat now. I think we can kind of open it up to Q&A for sure. Judith, one of the things I thought was really cool in the book, is this term, and I'm kicking it off with my own question, guys. So one of the terms I thought was really cool in the book was nutrition, psychiatry. and using almost like nutrition as a means to treat certain diseases. So can you tell us a little bit more about that concept?
Well, yeah, this is really exciting. It's kind of the new cutting edge of nutrition research, nutritional psychiatry, and they're really looking at it very seriously at places like Harvard and Johns Hopkins and so on. And it's based on the recognition that diet and mental health are connected. So we've known for many years, that certain nutrients are very good for helping you cope with stress. B vitamins, magnesium, so on. That's been around for a long time. And, food and mood connection. We all we know that many of us that, if you're really feeling down, having a little bit of chocolate usually picks you up. And now we know why, because chocolate is very high in polyphenols. And polyphenols really boost the beneficial bacteria in your gut. They're one of the reasons why you should eat lots of colorful fruits and vegetables and so on, but also dark chocolate. So the link is that your gut produces 90%, over 90% of the hormone serotonin. And serotonin is known as the happy hormone. So there you go, right back to the gut, nutrition, and health. There was also, when you asked me about, what would be the one key thing that I would recommend, and it would be a plant-based or plant-focused diet. A recent study called the SMILES trial really took a look at the Mediterranean diet, which has been studied. I talk about it a lot because it's been actively studied, and it has been shown to have all kinds of health benefits. And they used the Mediterranean diet with people who had been diagnosed as being clinically depressed. And they found that it cured the clinical depression in at least a third and improved it dramatically in most of the other participants. So you really do have these links between food and mood that we're now looking at and documenting. And beginning again, thanks to some of our advanced scientific techniques, being able to show how they work.
Yeah, well, that is amazing. And I hope to see a lot more of that in the future for sure. So, okay, so we had a question from Janine. What would you suggest for a woman that is unable to eat most foods during pregnancy or has difficulty keeping food down?
Well, try and find something that she can. I know my daughter is pregnant and with her second child, but I know that it's easy if you're pregnant to if you can't eat one day, to start panicking because you think that you are not nurturing the baby in a proper way and not giving it the nutrients it needs. But if you yourself are well nourished and have a lot of reserves to build on, the odd day or two that you can't eat because you're feeling too crappy, it is not going to have a long-term effect on the baby. One of the things that they found with the Dutch hunger winter, for instance, compared to some other longitudinal studies that they had done, is that those women had been, most of them, very well nourished before the winter that they were starved. It was the Germans closed the borders and the food couldn't get in for about 9 months. But before that, they had been very well nourished. So their babies were not as likely to be born with a low birth weight. They did experience some of the epigenetic modifications that came about because of hunger, being starved, and they had higher rates of heart disease and so on in the end, but they were not as dramatically affected as women who had not been well fed, who had this history, generational history of poor nutrition. So, the thing, really, the advice is to just try and cope with it as best you can, and just don't try to eat food that is nutritious and nutrient dense when you do eat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always about what can you do? What can you do in this situation? How can you make the best of it? And I think that's a great point too, because I think moms are so keen on like, oh, I have to like nourish my baby, but if you have reserves, you can be okay for a few days. It's always about getting down what you can. I have a lot of friends that are pregnant right now, and a lot of them are going through that same thing of like, oh, just no appetite. But that's a great point, and all that is really great information. And yeah, we have a few more really great comments here. So Susan, really great points about, she's been in the nutrition field for over 40 years and, eating a variety of foods, balanced diet, exercise, sleep, moderate a moderate and adequate diet, all great things. I'm curious, is there anything that you found in your research about sleep and I guess like rest and recovery that kind of can show up generations later?
I didn't look at sleep, but sleep is very important, as we know, and it's really a comer in terms of health.
Mm-hmm.
And it does affect everything, the circadian rhythms and and that affect, when you eat and what you absorb and so on and so forth. And we have a lot to learn there. And we're seeing research that suggests we're heading in that direction. But yeah, sleep is very important. So really, sleep, exercise, and limit your exposure to toxins. Manage stress. I mean, we're talking about epigenetic modifications. Things like mindfulness, mindfulness, and so on have been also shown to improve gene expression. So, it's really a package of healthy lifestyle practices and good sleep hygiene, I think is the term, is one of them.
Awesome. And then another great comment from Carol here, who's taught childbirth classes for over 20 years. In explaining anatomy, I would tell my class that the health of the placenta is based on good nutrition for a couple of years before becoming pregnant. So it's really, your nutrition and taking care of yourself years leading up to the pregnancy. So that's a great point as well. And then I think, oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
I was going to say the maternal educators that I talked to when I was writing the book really recommend that both sexes prepare for pregnancy at least 3 months ahead and preferably a year. Because, all of these things that we talk about, a healthy diet, positive lifestyle modifications, can also improve the quality of sperm and help a mother to build up her nutritional reserves and help with getting the fetus off to a very good start.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have one more question here. I think it's probably a really great one to end on. Is it true that we should eat what our ancestors ate to stay healthy?
Well, we should certainly try and eat whole, the closer what our ancestors had were access to real whole foods. And I guess the closer you can get to food being freshly harvested, freshly picked, is the better it is, because the its nutrients are still at their optimum. So, yeah, lots of plants and freshly harvested. That's, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that about wraps it up, guys. If you have any more last minute questions, drop them in the chat now. But we will also, yes, don't forget to sign up to receive a free copy of your book, You Are What Your Grandparents Ate. I learned so much from this book. It was, really, really eye-opening. I've always thought epigenetics was very interesting, but knowing, that there are generational effects to all this stuff is really, really cool. So Judith, thank you so much for your time. This was super enlightening. Guys, don't forget to sign up for your book in the link that we just dropped in the chat there. And then Janine said, thank you. And can you review how to get the CEU? You're just going to put your email in that link, or in the form that you will go to from the link that we just dropped in the chat, and we're going to send you a certificate. So you will just get it straight to your email. Super, super simple. So, all right. I think that was everything. But Judith, again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all of your great work and research. This is really fascinating stuff. So we really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. All right, guys. Y'all have a great night. Thank you so much. And don't forget, we'll have the recording available. We'll email that to you as well. And we hope you enjoyed it. Okay.